Before Francis Ngannou left, heavyweight was simple. There was a champion, there were contenders, and there was no confusion about who sat at the top. When he knocked out Stipe Miocic, it wasn't just a title change. It was a clean end to an era. Stipe had defended the belt against every style heavyweight could offer. Wrestlers, strikers, pressure fighters. Francis didn't scrape by on points. He erased doubt. At heavyweight, that matters. This division doesn't revolve around activity. It revolves around clarity. When someone gets finished decisively, the hierarchy resets without argument. Then came Cyril Gane. On paper, Gane represented evolution. Technical, mobile, composed. The type of heavyweight who historically exposes pure power punchers. Francis entered that fight with a torn ACL and MCL. Instead of collapsing, he adapted. He wrestled, he controlled position. He managed the fight strategically. That performance did something important. It removed the last stylistic question. He wasn't just dangerous, he was complete. At that moment, the heavyweight throne felt stable. There was no immediate rival narrative, no unresolved matchup, no looming challenger who felt inevitable. The belt had authority because the champion had removed uncertainty, and that's what made his exit destabilizing. He didn't lose momentum, he didn't age out, he didn't get dethroned. He left at his peak. When a champion leaves undefeated, something unusual happens. The next man to wear the belt doesn't inherit it through conquest. He inherits it through vacancy. And in a division built on dominance and finality, that difference carries weight. Francis didn't leave quietly. He didn't retire. He didn't fade. He forced a negotiation. And that's where the collision happened. The UFC offered him the largest heavyweight contract in company history, more than Brock Lesnar, more than anyone before him. On paper, it looked like validation, but Francis wasn't negotiating for money alone. He wanted freedom to box. He wanted sponsorship flexibility. He wanted structural changes that would give fighters more leverage. That request wasn't just about personal gain. It challenged the operating model. The UFC doesn't share champions. It doesn't co-promote. It doesn't open contractual doors that weaken centralized control. For years, heavyweight functioned because the champion aligned with the system. Francis didn't. So the division hit a fork in the road. Preserve control or preserve the champion. The UFC chose control, and from a business perspective, that decision is consistent. No organization wants its biggest belt tied to an athlete negotiating external leverage, especially not at heavyweight, the division historically marketed as the baddest man on the planet. But here's the consequence. When Francis walked away, the belt didn't pass through violence. It passed through release papers. There was no loss to avenge, no unfinished rivalry, no symbolic dethroning, just absence. And absence creates instability, because now the question wasn't who beat Francis. It became, is the current champion better than a man who never lost? That's a dangerous shadow to cast over any successor. And the UFC's solution was immediate. Book Jon Jones. On paper, that move restored legitimacy. The greatest mixed martial artist of all time moving up to heavyweight. But legitimacy isn't only about names, it's about continuity. And continuity had already broken. When Jon Jones defeated Cyril Gane, the UFC regained something important. Star power, narrative gravity, a champion with global recognition. But it still didn't regain continuity, because Jon didn't beat Francis. He beat the contender Francis had already defeated. That distinction matters more at heavyweight than anywhere else. This division doesn't run on volume, it runs on hierarchy. And hierarchy only stabilizes when one elite fighter eliminates another. Jon became champion, but the unanswered question remained suspended above the division. Would he have beaten Ngannou? That unresolved comparison created a vacuum. A title can exist without clarity. Authority cannot. Then came the Stipe fight announcement. On paper, it was legacy versus legacy. Greatest ever versus greatest heavyweight ever. From a marketing standpoint, it was clean. From a divisional standpoint, it stalled momentum. Because while Jones prepared for Stipe, Tom Aspinall knocked out Sergey Pavlovich and won the interim belt. Now the division had two champions. And interim titles are supposed to accelerate resolution. They're supposed to force a unification. Instead, the heavyweight division did something different. It waited. Jones got injured. 9 months passed. Aspinall defended the interim title. He stayed active. But the unification didn't happen. At this point, the pattern was visible. Heavyweight was no longer governed by activity. It was governed by preservation. Legacy fights took priority over divisional clarity. Strategic risk avoidance took priority over structural resolution. And when Jones eventually returned and beat Stipe, the question didn't disappear. It intensified. The fight fans wanted wasn't Stipe anymore. It was Jones versus Aspinall, youth versus legacy, speed versus experience, momentum versus history. That matchup carried something different: risk. For Jones, beating Stipe added to his resume. Beating Aspinall risks subtracting from it. And when incentives become asymmetrical, decisions become predictable. Then came the retirement. No unification, no definitive loss, no closure. The vacuum remained. And once again, the heavyweight division had a champion, but not resolution. Francis Ngannou didn't just leave the UFC, he left a structural gap that still hasn't closed. When a champion is beaten, the division recalibrates instantly. The new champion inherits legitimacy through conquest. The old champion becomes history. But when a champion leaves undefeated, the hierarchy fractures. Because now every future champion is measured against a ghost. Jon Jones won the belt. Tom Aspinall became interim champion. But neither man erased Francis. And that changes how the division feels. At heavyweight, perception matters more than volume. There aren't 15 contenders cycling constantly. There aren't 3 title defenses a year. The belt needs dominance to stay authoritative. Francis provided that. His knockouts weren't just wins, they were final statements. When he left, the UFC didn't just lose a champion, it lost closure. The organization responded logically. Insert the biggest name available. Stabilize attention, preserve brand control, but attention is not the same as resolution. Jon versus Gane created a champion. It didn't create continuity. Jon versus Stipe created a spectacle. It didn't eliminate the shadow. And Jon versus Aspinall, the fight that could have restored structural clarity, never happened. So now the heavyweight division exists in a strange position. It has a belt, it has contenders, it has activity, but it doesn't have finality. And without finality, heavyweight loses its defining trait. This division was always marketed as simple. One punch, one king. No debate. Now it operates on hypotheticals. Would Jones have beaten Francis? Would Francis have beaten Jones? Would Aspinall beat either? The throne still exists, but it no longer feels absolute. And that is the real consequence of Francis Ngannou walking away undefeated. Francis Ngannou didn't destroy the heavyweight division. He exposed its fragility. The system survived. The belt survived. The events kept selling. But something quieter shifted. For decades, heavyweight represented final authority. When the champion won, the debate ended. When the champion lost, the hierarchy reset. Now the division moves, but the argument never closes. Jon Jones retired without unifying. Tom Aspinall rose without defeating the previous king. Francis left without being conquered. 3 champions, 0 resolution. And that's the part most fans feel but can't articulate. The instability isn't about ducking. It isn't about contracts. It isn't even about personalities. It's about succession. Heavyweight only works when power transfers through violence. When that chain breaks, perception lingers. And perception is everything in the king division. Francis didn't just win fights, he left a question behind. And until someone eliminates every doubt inside the cage, not outside it, the heavyweight throne will feel slightly unclaimed. That's not chaos, that's consequence. If you want MMA explained beyond outrage and headlines, subscribe to Cage Reality. Because in fighting, what destabilizes divisions isn't always defeat. Sometimes it's departure.